Hello, winners, and welcome once again to the Wrong Button podcast. Today, I am so fortunate to be joined by the illustrious Doc of Adios.
Hey,
Hey,
illustrious, huh?
you are illustrious. I get to talk to great people on this, even if they're friends or like my wife and my best friend sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like they should be celebrated. You've done a lot of fantastic things. And so, yes, illustrious. I thought that would be the perfect way to bring you in.
Works for me.
Thank you very much. And so, full disclosure, I reason I wanted to do this podcast with you is you have actually developed and played or developed video games.
Yes, yes, I
Uh,
have.
the one mentioned and that I'm very familiar with is Adios.
That's correct. I also did some work on Hard Space Shipbreaker for
Oh,
Blackbird, and I just want to shill that because I love those guys.
okay. Is that also so? I'm a complete console scrub. I've never had like a good gaming PC. I have one that I use for channel work and podcasting, but it's a
Sure, sure.
heavy duty laptop. Is that also on platforms?
I think it's coming to consoles. I'm not really sure. It's been a while. I have it on PC myself. Let me look. Keep going. I'll tell you.
All right. So the reason I wanted to have you on here is because I was listening to the podcast you were on with Castle Super Beast with Pat and Wooly,
hmm
and at one point they were having you go through and describe your game Adios, and you started describing your game in the term of verbs and actions,
Right.
which
That's pretty standard approach.
and that's you say that like it's pretty standard. So one of the things that I want to do, myself, I'm an English major by college degree, and I got very into linguistics. And there's a old linguistics theory that is the world that you see and how you see it or perceive it is shaped by the vocabulary you have and the lexicon that you can use to describe things.
Sure.
So I meant to. Have you ever seen the ocean?
Like the actual ocean.
Yeah, like ever went, swimmed in it, anything like that?
Yeah, I've been to both Maine and California, so I've seen both coasts.
Okay. How would you describe the ocean?
Big, like that's always the thing that gets me. It's just you walk out there, you see the ocean, and it's huge.
Mhm. And that's where things like there's a old Muppets movie, Muppet Treasure Island, where they at one point Fozzie's trying to describe the ocean. They're trying to like make him understand what they're about to do, and he goes, "Oh, the big blue wet thing."
hmm
And then if you were to read like a lot of poetry, I grew up in a fishing town, so like vast, a lot of like temptress, it's so many brilliant names and very poetic for the ocean. And you say big, and then I can listen to a sailor go waxingly poetic about it or completely crude and vulgar, and it changes the entire narrative of what you're looking at.
Yep, I remember for a while there was this sort of discredited. I mean, it's become discredited. Uh, Theory that colors show up in different languages over time, and the person theorizing it or pushing this theory was saying, oh hey, this is where subjective cultural perspectives come in, and he was trying to argue that certain cultures evolved certain colors first, like in a certain order.
Hmm.
And he pointed at one thing being Homer mentioning that the oceans were wine dark. And you have to remember that Homer was blind. Not only has the guy's work been discredited, but Homer specifically was blind, and when he described the ocean as wine dark, it was more likely because the ocean that he touched felt to him like wine. Um, and he was just doing his best to describe it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, despite that being sort of a discredited theory, it's interesting to use that as an example. Still, Homer being blind, having a perception of the ocean based on his other senses. There's still a way that impacts his lexicon, right?
Yes. And because you said it was standard to describe a game in the terms of verbs. Now, is that like from a programming setting, or is that from a
It's
just
a game design thing, yeah. If you watch, say, a bunch of GDC talks or you read a bunch of essays on this or whatever, you will find a lot of game designers describe the actions you take in a game as the verbs. And it's weird because we don't talk about nouns nearly as much.
Hmm.
Um, Verbs, though, are just generally what we use to describe, open door or pull trigger and shoot guy, right? Like a verb is a thing you do.
Yes.
Um, so I disliking walking sims specifically because they're games in which you walk and you hear a story told in your general direction. And that's all there is. Like you're often not the actual protagonist
Hmm.
or the point of view character. You're a person who is. I was actually talking with a friend today, and he brought up it's like a museum exhibit, right? Like you walk through a museum, and you got the little earphone thing, and it's just a person describing what you're seeing. You're not really part of the action part of the story or this other thing. So when I sat down and was like, okay, what kind of games can I make based on my strengths as a writer? I have a film degree and a minor in creative writing. When I look at my strengths, what can I build that takes advantage of those strengths, right? And I ended up going, well, unfortunately, based on the budget that I have, early on in my career, especially, what can what will people trust me with? How much money can someone trust me with so that I can pay people, fairly so that we can make good things together? And, unfortunately, walking sims were kind of one of the things that were kind of doable, rather than say like a big open world co-op, shooter, right? That's impossible for me at my current level of income. They don't even give that to certain AAA developers. You have to be really, really cream of the crop, or you have to be working for a publisher that only wants that in
Hmm.
order to get it. Um, like even The Witcher, right? Witcher One, not a big open world thing. Witcher Two, still not that. You know, and we see it's really hard too. Cyberpunk, they spent years working on that, and that thing broke, right? So it's like, what can I be trusted with? Well, I could probably be trusted with a walking sim. What kind of walking sim would I want to make? Well, I don't really like walking sims, and it's because they're verbless, really. Like you hold down the walk button, and
Hmm.
if you're lucky, maybe you'll get to pick up and examine an object. And if you're really lucky, maybe you'll get to solve a puzzle. And that'd be like something like Amnesia: A Machine for Pigs, where you can solve a couple puzzles. But in general, these aren't enjoyable experiences. And I wrote an essay about this idea that walking sims. I noticed they were dying. They got a lot of hype. Like
Hmm.
Tacoma had a Game Informer cover, right? And yet Tacoma only sold 10,000 copies. The Chinese rooms started to close down. Like these premier walking sim studios were not making a sustainable business out of it. And that kind of got me thinking, well, maybe players, when they first heard about Gone Home, they were like, wow, this premise sounds really cool. I can't wait to try it out. And then once they played it, they went, oh, this is not an experience I would play again because you just walk around and listen to another story being told at you. And I realize there are a million people out there who are going to say, but I liked it. It mattered to me. And I'm not trying to like invalidate that, but since a lot of my work has been dealing with like people who run studios asking me how can I make my game sell more, I'm very pragmatic in my approach. So when I look at a thing and I see that it's not doing well, it's not sustaining the business, I immediately start going, okay, what are the weak points here? What are the failure points? How do we solve this problem? Like I do essentially failure analysis, but for art, which is really hard to do because art's so subjective.
Hmm.
And I noticed that a commonality between a lot of the walking sims that didn't succeed was a lack of verbs. So Adios, is continuing that philosophy of like, oh, my budget's really tiny, so I can't do a whole lot, but I could probably do some interesting things here. So, you know, we had to cut, unfortunately, photography. We weren't actually sure if we could take pictures and then get them to save and then put that on the Xbox.
Hmm.
So we ultimately just decided not to do that. We also would have had to model a deer and animate it and have more dialogue and all those. There's a whole thing that was going to be there. So we cut that, right? But and we stripped back other things. Like there's a scene in Adios where you work on a car.
Yes.
It was originally going to be like this is an actual machine in the game and like you can do things to make it work or not work, and if you figure out how to make it work, you get different dialogue than if you don't. The idea being that we would sort of connect that to the player's sensations as they sort of prepare for death, which is what Adios is about, is preparing for death. I mean, it's about a lot of things. That's one of the things. Uh, so for me, making a game with as many verbs as possible, and I know I just gave examples where I dialed back, but I mean, we still have fishing, we have talking, we have playing horseshoes, we have, you know, uh, cooking, right? Like we have all these different verbs. Some of them work really well. Some of them, like I wish we were, a bigger team with more budget and stuff, because we are a very tiny team. We had one programmer, right? We had
Hmm.
one guy for QA, which is me. Like, there's only so much we can do uh, with the resources we have, and that's true of every video game. Even the most expensive video games in the world still have limits. And with video games, you are building reality from nothing. It's not like a movie where you can just say, you shoot a scene and you're like, hey, you know what? Can you like put your hand into that bag and pull out a gun there, like instead of at this other scene? Like, can we
Hmm.
try that? You can't do that in a game without like 20 people working 6 months of overtime to actually pull off. It's absurd, just because you are building an entire reality, and you have to keep all of reality in your head, all the rules, right?
Hmm.
Friction, gravity, all this stuff. Light, how light works. It's crazy. And so it's very difficult to do, but we did it. We made a game where you do a lot of different things, and it's you doing those things. It's not you hearing about some other person, right? Like if I was going to make a typical walking sim, it would have just been Bill going to the farmhouse and like exploring it and trying to find out why his dad went missing. And that would
Yes.
not be a compelling game. The premise might sound cool. A son arrives at his father's abandoned farmhouse to find out why he disappeared. That's a good premise.
Yes.
But it's not about Bill. It's not about, the things that Bill is doing. And it probably would have just been some light puzzle solving and walking around and looking for notes. It wouldn't have been a good game. It would have been forgettable. It would have been like every other walking sim out there. So making Adios a game about you being a person who is standing in front of an American chestnut tree and having that break, realizing, oh, I'm probably going to die. I can't win this, and maybe that's okay. That's a difficult scene to put the player in, but by doing that, we give the player, I think, a much more powerful emotional response than if we did this another way.
And when you're saying that, it makes sense because when you describe, okay, Bill going to the farm to figure out what happened to his father because he hasn't heard from him,
Hmm.
you're right. It would have been very. You're telling me everything that's happening. You're telling me everything that happened. And I know you brought that up on the podcast where you don't like that. You want to be able to experience it. So you've introduced characters in Adios that might be explored in Adios too. The Hitman,
Hmm.
correct?
Yeah, yeah. I actually was working on Audios 2 yesterday, believe it or not, where we are, going through and being like, okay, what's the central conflict here? So I worked at a line yesterday where it's like a character says to Hitman, "Now you see why I want to kill this guy, right?"
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the actual line. I'm not going to tell you the actual line
No,
here,
don't please don't.
years in advance. But like, it's a moment, like a very specific moment in the game that changes the entire dynamics of the scene. And I got to just sit there and do that, and to build on this character from, you know like what's happening in Adios is really fun to do, because you get to explore him more. And as we're talking, like, does he has to have a name, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting there like, I really, really enjoyed that I wrote this like a play where the characters don't have names. And now here I am, like, doing a, like 13 chapter story with the Hitman. I know how it ends. I love this story, but like, oh no, he probably do need to have a name this time. Oh no, what do I do? So I got to figure that out, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I will say this: if you said, okay, how would you make a game about Bill going back to his dad's place, and how would you make it interesting? That's very simple. Someone else would be at the farm. That's it. Like, you would have him go, and it would be seemingly empty. and the tree would be chopped down, and then he would meet someone on the farm, and the game wouldn't actually be about finding out what happened to his dad. It would be about this conflict between Bill, who wants to reclaim, like, who thought he had, who thought he never wanted to see his father again, realizing his father is gone, like
Hmm.
really truly gone, not just ran off somewhere. He's definitely gone. And then a conflict with someone else on that farm. That's how I would do it. Because that would be more interesting, right? It's really a game about Bill. And when you make, so many of these walking sims where like the protagonist doesn't speak or they only speak in voiceover,
Hmm.
it just loses that energy. But if you have a guy going, "What happened to my father? How did he disappear?" And then you have, say, someone in Bill's childhood bedroom pointing a gun at him. And I'm not saying that I would do that, right? Because I'm workshopping it here as we talk.
Yes.
But if you do that, you're like, "Zing, oh my god, there's a thing here." And you can add energy to the moment by, say, setting it during a storm. And then suddenly it's like, "Oh, there's a tornado outside, we need to go down below." And you've got two characters sitting kind of in the basement across from each other talking. You can create dynamics, and you can establish power dynamics, and you can have characters engaging with each other and learning about each other and things. You can bring moments into the scene that change everything you thought you knew. And you can do all that and make the game really good, or you can make a game that's kind of solipsistic. You just walk around and you're like a vessel that hears someone else's story. So I mean, even in the solipsism, it's not really about you; it's about somebody else, which is it's kind of weird.
It's
Sorry, I'm
like,
rambling. I'm
no,
rambling.
you actually. So it was beautiful how you described that, and how you wanted to create a story and a narrative and the conflict that's there with your games with two people talking. Because when I was playing your game and after you described it by the verbs, like I've
Hmm.
read a few books on, like I read Blood, Sweat, and Pixels about last year,
Yep.
and I'm reading Press Reset, which is about burnout in the video game industry uh, right now, and I totally lost the author's name, but he's a prominent uh, video game journalist.
You talking about Jason Schreier's books?
Yes,
Okay, gotcha.
and very good, very approachable, especially when it's like I'm 30 now. I've had I'm gonna say like the quote unquote like real office jobs.
Hmm.
Uh, so for me, like wanting to glimpse into that world, that it's been very eye opening for that. But when you were describing your game as in verbs, I started playing Adios. I've played through it probably about 4 times.
Oh
Uh,
wow, thank you.
no, thank you. Thank you. I wanted to play with a few things on it there, on how you said it, because I wanted to get a feel for the verbs. And as I was playing your game and I was trying to describe it to somebody else, I was like, it's like West Wing on a farm without the politics, and instead it's personal history, because you did something that was so well done in West Wing, where it was people walked in transition, they had a very meaningful conversation, and then ultimately there was that finality scene before the transition to the next episode where it's like, here is the resolution at this spot.
Hmm.
And I was very akin to I was like, oh, I was like, this I am playing a version of West Wing.
Hmm.
And I could choose to do chores, I could choose who had the power. For instance, one of the first things I did, uh, the first action you're supposed to take, Bill tells the hitman, go out. We're going to go out and you're going to help out on the farm. Fine. We're going to shovel shit and we're going to do that first. And you're going to do it.
Hmm.
And my first time playing through is actually playing through it with my wife, who, by the way, the entire time was like, I'm waiting for him to be like, they're going to move a body. They're going to move a body. They're going to. I'm like, did you miss the opening scene? Um,
Yeah,
and
I mean,
she's
in the opening scene, that is a body wrapped in butcher paper. Yeah.
yeah, and it was one of those things where she didn't quite. I was like, that's what it was, and then at the end, she's like, "Why do I hear oh no?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's." She also really enjoyed that, and she loved the dialogue because it was for both of us. Because at one point, I was like, "Okay, let me play through the game, and I'm gonna play through it," and I was like, "I'm gonna make her pick what to do."
Hmm.
But you had these bookended scenes, and you would walk and talk, and then at the very end, you would get the dialogue. But I enjoyed that when you went to shovel shit, you could pick up a shovel and help. or you could leave it there. When you had eggs and you were sitting across from your, I'm just, you're sitting across from your executioner.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
sure, that works.
um,
He's Hitman is what we call him, but yeah.
and I was just doing because you said it's about coming to terms with death. And I was sitting there and it was like, okay, do I partake in this meal or do I kind of sit there and fixate on this coffee cup? Or
Right.
do I fixate on this salt? And to me, it gave this complete sense. How would you actually be? And I know you said like you didn't like walking sim because that's what you did, but for all the scenes where you had the traditional walking sim uh, tropes, it felt very poignant.
Yeah, it was in part because, so much of the game relies on it being you and another person. All the walking sims I dislike are I don't want to say antisocial, because that's not quite the word I'm looking for, but antisocial kind of gets the idea, right? The solipsistic isn't quite the right word either, but this idea that you need to connect with other people, right? Like human existence is not entirely solitary unless you're like in, the inhumane condition of solitary confinement.
Mm-hmm.
When we interact with other people, that changes us. That has an impact on us. So nailing a sense of actual human dynamics was really crucial to me. And it's I really appreciate that you got the breakfast example, because to me that was one of the earliest ideas for the entire game, and it's because I'd originally pitched a different project. It's a lot bigger. It's about the character Slick, who's mentioned in Adios. He's the one who's fighting in the Gulf War.
Yep.
And in Slick's game, uh, Hitman and Saul will lie to him and tell him the old man passed and wanted him to have the El Camino. And that's true. The old man did
Yes.
want him to have the El Camino. They just didn't tell him what they did. Um, because this sort of great sin of Adios impacts, it ripples outward. There's an impact here, and it's all because of all the people who are connected to the event. And the thing about Slick's game is, one of the very first scenes I knew I wanted to do was you sitting in a diner and being able to play with your food while having conversations. And the reason was, long time ago, BioWare made Mass Effect, and they were like, yeah, we saw this, shot reverse shot thing from some TV show, and we thought it was really cool, like some British sitcom or something. And they're like, we thought it was really cool, so we wanted to make our dialogue system based on that. And it looks like butt. Like I get that it's an early Xbox 360 game, the Mass Effect specifically. But as somebody who went to film school, like when we were in our documentary 101 class, that was one of the first things they were like, don't do this, it bores your viewer. And when I look at like how I'm going through dialogue, I often find myself skipping through dialogue in games,
Mm-hmm.
and it's often because the dialogue is just shot reverse shot. Somebody says, "Hi, my name's Bill," and the other person's like, "Hi, my name is Fred," and they just talk. It's just boring.
Okay, that's
But
so. Is that just like I'm sorry because this I'm coming from someone who like
sure,
you're.
sure.
Is this shot reverse shot? Is I say something, cut from me to you, cut back, and it's just like an engage like that where it feels
Yep, yep.
choppy.
Yeah, it does feel really choppy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are ways to smooth it over. Like you can like the way Barbara Walters interviews do it, the ABC newscaster, right? She'll start talking while we're seeing the other person's face, or they'll start talking while we're seeing her face, and they'll cut even like between the audio. Like the video and the audio aren't synced up at the cut. It's not when somebody else starts talking. And that often happens in video games, where they only change on the line change.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with like Barbara Walters, she might be talking to Obama, and Obama might say like, you know, I think we should do drone strikes, and they won't even leave Barbara Walters' face. They'll focus on her the entire time to get her reaction, her emote at his line.
Mm-hmm.
And they did this with Oprah in that big interview she did recently with the, what's their names, the Windsors, where they
Oh
would,
yeah.
yeah, and some of those shots are just to help the audience understand what's happening by watching Oprah Winfrey's response to the questions being asked and answered, like, or just answered. Like sometimes you'll just see her frown or smile or whatever, emote, and you don't get that in a lot of video games. You just get line change. Okay, we're changing the camera angle now. It's very programmatic because it's easy. I mean, I say it's easy. That's not really accurate. Anything you do in making a video game is hard, but like it's when you're doing a programmatic thing, the simplest way to do it is to have, especially if you want to automate it, is to have the line change and the camera change at the same time. If you want to get really interesting, you can do some lag and stuff like that. And I think BioWare has done this. There's a bit of nice camera work in there, but it's still kind of boring.
Hmm.
And then you move on to like The Witcher 3 or Cyberpunk 2077, and I know that's a game a lot of people are like, oh, it's so buggy, blah blah blah. Cyberpunk has legitimately the best conversational camera work I've ever seen. It is incredibly good because apparently none of that is motion captured. It's actually done with AI, which is insane. Um, the amount of effort they went to make those conversations feel natural without actually just hand animating everything or motion capturing everything is ridiculous. It's like tech that I feel like everybody should want. But me, I started thinking about how I have conversations with people. And you know what? I don't sit there and just stare at the person the whole time. I fiddle with my french fries. I take a sip of my Pepsi. Like, I look around the room. If I've got like a toy to play with, right? Like a ball or something, I start, rolling the ball around or something. I fidget. And it's
Hmm.
partly because I have ADHD, but everybody does it. Nobody just sits there and stares at you the whole time without making you uncomfortable. So for me, I suddenly kind of by thinking about this sort of rejection I had of how BioWare's system worked, as well as how documentaries work. And this is like 2014, 2015, as I'm thinking. Yeah, about 2014 when I'm thinking about this. And it was like, oh, okay, I can make games with conversation systems where you're doing things rather than just talking. Because up to that point, the only conversation systems I'd ever dealt with, there's a game about a dinner party that actually is AI that learns from what you type. So you can type anything in and it can actually respond to you naturalistically,
Hmm.
which is wizardry. But now those guys make games for the United States military on negotiating with people, which is weird. Um, like could have been great games. Instead, they're working for the army. Great. Oh, nice. Good job. I'm being really sarcastic here. Um, feels like wasted opportunity. But you know, the idea that most of the games I played was like you have a list of dialogue options, whether that's the circular like Mass Effect style, since we talked about Mass Effect earlier, or the the we'll just keep it with Bioware, the Dragon Age style of like vertical column, here are your dialogue options, or some games you just like I noticed this in Genshin. Sometimes you get to pick dialogue, but all it
Hmm.
really is just one dialogue option, and it took me a while, but I finally realized the reason they're doing that is because those are the only lines where your character is talking. I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So they let you actually click a button because your character isn't voiced. Therefore, clicking a button is you participating in the conversation, but it's still just one line, right?
Hmm.
Me, I messed around with dialogue, right? Like in Adios, you notice we had the uh shit line, right? Where he's like, "What are we shoveling?" And you have like all of your options are just words for shit.
Yes.
And it's because Farmer is a person. He's not. You are not like defining his character. You can't choose Renegade or Paragon Farmer. There's just Farmer. Okay. There's nobody else. It's just him.
Hmm.
And he has a personality. But I wasn't interested in using the dialogue system to let you expand on who he is. There's some choices where like every single dialogue choice that Farmer has is something that he would say. It is
Yes.
within his character to say. You are not defining his character. This is not a role playing game. Okay. And when I say role playing game, I don't mean like the Japanese role playing game, which is a completely different genre. It's not a role playing game at all. It's an adventure game with
Yes.
party mechanics and stat systems, all the things that made like Wizardry what it was, and that's because they were inspired by Wizardry, which is a great series. Like I could get into a whole thing. I'm not going to get into that now. If you want to talk about it, I'm happy to. But like later, because I'm rambling. Uh, in an actual RPG, the
Hmm.
main core thing, the one thing that makes an RPG is roleplay. Roleplay is not playing a role, even though those words are the same. Roleplay comes from a history of improvisation. In Adios, you cannot improvise. That's why there's an achievement when you point a shotgun at the hitman.
Yes,
The achievement is a nice try, right? Because we know that you, the player, are wondering what would happen if you shot this man. And I mean, originally my plan was there are several opportunities to kill the hitman, and every time you do it, time rewinds and hitman kind of looks at you like what? Because
you're not that person.
you're thinking about it, but you're choosing not to do it, and you never would. But ultimately, for budget reasons and also just because it's better this way,
Hmm.
as visually interesting as that would be, and that's a good argument for it. Ultimately, it's better for Hitman to be just this guy who has a specific life he's living. But that means, okay, why have a dialogue system at all? Why is this game a game, right? And there have been people who argued, oh, this game's not really a game because it doesn't have enough interactivity. You can't win, blah blah. Like, I wanted to do interesting things with interactivity.
Hmm.
So for me, as I was sitting there and I was thinking about it, and I started writing the Bill scene, I was like, what if I gave you dialogue options that would go away when you picked them because you couldn't actually say them? Because I'd been thinking a lot about subtext because this is a game
Yes.
about subtext, and I was trying to figure out how do you make a game about subtext because so many games are just text or lore or exposition, and there's not a lot of like two characters talking about something they really don't want to talk about. And that's what I wanted the game to be, was a game about subtext. Even if it's, me fucking hitting you over the head with an anvil, it is, there's still subtext. There's two guys not wanting to talk about the thing they have to talk about.
Yes.
So to do that, sorry, I had to take a sip of my Pepsi there.
No, you're good.
To do that, I came up with this idea of you would see dialogue and you could click it, but it would be like, I originally wanted strike through, but we couldn't do it for some reason. There's just a limitation with I think the tech or the font, I can't remember. Um, but we couldn't do strike through. So we grayed it out slightly and put it askew, and when you click it, it disappears and Farmer makes like a effort noise, right? Um, because how many times have you done that? How many arguments have you been in, or conversations or whatever, where you think something and you can't say it?
Oh,
So,
it was one of the most relatable scenes when I got there. So for me, like I said, I saw the game first by watching Wooly and then Pat play through it.
hmm
And so the first time I looked at my wife and I said, "Hey, I'm interviewing Doc, so we're gonna play through Adios." And she sat beside me on the sofa, and sometimes she'll watch games, sometimes she won't. And we got to that part, and the first time, the first actual sequence that you chose, she's like, "No, choose that one," and I
hmm
did. And it wasn't askew yet. It was perfectly lined up, and it was grayed out enough. Or I think the first one they're all white,
okay,
and then the next one went through and it got grayer. And then she realized, she's like, we can't say that. And there was almost a level of frustration there, but like that's the thing to say. And I started to pick up on that because like I was like from a storytelling element, I'm like, okay, so, and that's one of the reasons I went back and actually played it like 4 times, because the first time I actually didn't go shovel shit first, and that was the first thing that you were supposed to do. And I
right,
was like, okay, well, if I had done this or said this, would that have given me courage at any point in time to actually have said something? And I realized that it was no, like this is, no matter what, who this character is, this is not him. Everything else is kind of like, if you didn't go shovel shit first, it's like, hey, I'll save it for later. And it was, we do have a little bit of camaraderie here. We're both kind of, in this together, and there is what's like not familiarity, but there is a friendship there that is honest and actual,
yeah,
compared to purely a business transaction.
and that's why Audios 2 will be the way that it is. That relationship mattering is a big part of what happens next. Um, but I, obviously don't want to spoil it. But yeah, for me, giving you just this option to think things but not actually be able to say them
Hmm.
felt intuitive. But I've noticed that in a lot of the, a lot of the conversations that I have with people, um, time and time again, I just keep seeing like, oh, I thought, I could game this. I thought I could, and for me, this is not a game you can game, right?
Hmm.
This is not a system you can beat. There is no winning here. And that sense is I can't tell you where it originally came from. I don't know. I know that when I played Deus Ex Human Revolution, I loved that the bosses kind of threw me out of my, attempts at gaming the game because
Hmm.
they had their own shit going on.
Yes.
So there was playing that game and going, oh my god, this dude, like, I'm not built to fight him. But that makes sense, and that's really cool. And then all these gamers are just pissed online. They were like, "But I built a pure stealth build. Why can't I, pure stealth this guy?" And it's like they made the next two games after that, and the next two games just aren't as good. And I'm not going to say that the boss fights were the reason that the first game was good, but I think the game operating on its own terms and you having to solve what is there, what exists independent of you, is way better than a game that's designed around you. Again, it's anti-solipsism, right? Like
Hmm.
I generally find that the game that's designed to support the player and playing as many, like, to support as many builds as possible isn't as good as like the old school immersive sims like Stalker or Thief or Hit not Hitman, Stalker or Thief or System Shock, right? These games, it was like, here's a world and this is the way the world works. Here are your
Yes.
actions and you can do whatever you want. Go ham. And the newer games, the newer crop of immersive sims, a lot of people are like, oh, people just don't want immersive sims. No, 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 no. The reason that the newer crop of immersive sims doesn't work is because the game designers keep designing these games explicitly for as many player types as possible. And they're being too clever, by which I mean they're not actually clever at all, but they're being too, like, I'm kind of trying to figure out what the words I want to say are because I want to be diplomatic, but I also want to be supportive. But I also want to be like critical.
Honest.
Um, yeah, it's when you get really clever about your design and you overcomplicate or you overthink it or you're trying to support all the player types or whatever, you create something that is much less charming and personality filled because the player knows there's a solution. The player stops thinking about how to solve the problem and starts thinking about like what the designer wants. It pulls them out of the world of the space or whatever. So yeah, I've always been this kind of like, what if you couldn't do the thing you took for granted? And players sometimes butt into that and they don't like it. Now, Adios, obviously, I think we have like a 96% positive score on Steam. Like, people really seem to like us right now, which is, really encouraging, obviously. But obviously, a lot of people got it. But a few people, in all the negative, it's one of the most like common elements of, or one of the most common comments about the game is, I expected to be able to beat this, and no, it's just like that. And I think everybody kind of starts to really get it by the time you get to Bill, because you have that line like, I can't say anything. If I do, you might die. And I think people, once they get to that line, they go, oh, I this literally is just something I can think and never say. Um, but to me, that was a way to communicate to the player without just being expositionary. Like, it's not the right expository. Yeah,
Hmm.
because it's not about, games don't have to just be simple little puzzles you can solve and win. That's boring.
Hmm.
Games can be about being a person in another place and in another time in a meaningful way. Games have this profound ability to let you live another life. And I don't mean it in like the bizarre Second Life, this is just a place for people to do, you know, weird fetish shit. I mean, like,
Where they're not comfortable enough, like in their own life, it's like this is literally like a persona for them.
yeah, this, I remember when I was in school, a bunch of our teachers were like, "Oh yeah, Second Life is the future," and it's like, dude, this has been around for like 20 years and it's not made a dent. Like, come on. Second Life wants to be the metaverse, and now Epic wants to make the metaverse, and games have the ability to let you like become a character in a movie, right?
Hmm.
Like when I was growing up, maybe this is why I think about games the way they do, but as I was growing up, I often thought about what would happen if I was in the movie, right? Like, okay, Saving Private Ryan, they're all shooting each other on the beach, where they're arguing about the Czech conscripts, right?
Yeah.
What would I have said or done differently in that scenario? And it's obviously entirely fictional, but it does lead to the okay, well, what happens if I actually entered that space? How would I do things differently? How would the scenario change and evolve and all this stuff? And it's like, oh, games let you do that. You can go to ancient Egypt and then you get to like exist in ancient Egypt for a while in Assassin's Creed. That's cool. Like it's cool to be able to go back and walk around ancient Egypt. It's not perfect, 100% scientifically accurate,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to be. You're trying to get the vibes. The vibes are all that matter. The sense that you're in this place. You don't have to have 100% realism. It's it's an opportunity to engage with the narrative in a way that is different. But that doesn't mean that you know, it, it it doesn't mean that you get to have a say in everything that happens. There are movies where things feel inevitable. One of
Hmm.
my favorite games is Shadow Warrior, which is a tragedy. It's a first-person shooter. They start off with the touch from the Transformers movies. It doesn't seem like a tragedy, but the game is a literal tragedy. Like the way it's constructed, the way things work out, the whole game is genuinely constructed as a tragedy. The events that happen are inevitable, and it is heartbreaking, and that's what makes it good. Is art gives us a way of engaging with emotions that might be less safe to engage with in real life, like terror, right?
Hmm.
But it also gives us a healthy outlet in doing that, and that's good. Tarkovsky being all, the primary purpose of art is not about like informing people. It's not about teaching anybody a lesson. It's about preparing your soul, or rendering your soul capable of turning to good and preparing you for death. I mean, Tarkovsky is a very Russian Orthodox guy,
Yeah. He's.
but he's right. Like, even if it's filtered through that Russian Orthodox lens, art is a means of getting to know yourself. It's a means of exploring feelings you might not be able to otherwise. It's a way of dealing with things you couldn't do otherwise. And that's why, like, I don't want to brag when people give me praise for Adios. Like, I'm not here to snap. Like, I will snap my suspenders on Twitter because it's funny.
Yes.
But genuinely, I'm trying to make helpful things. Like, I'm not just some egomaniac. I'm not an artiste. Like, it feels really nice and validating when people praise the work. But and the reason I'm saying this is I'm going to bring up like some praise that people have sent, and I'm not trying to do this to brag, but like when somebody told me Adios helped me come to terms with my grandma's Alzheimer's, or another person was like, I was able to speak to my father about some problems that we'd had in our relationship because of your game. When I'm hearing that, I'm sitting there going, yes, that's what art is for. I did it. I did real art. It feels good. It feels validating, right?
Yeah.
And that, to me, I've seen people who are like, oh, I make art because I want to be seen as like a brilliant genius or whatever. Like, I don't give a shit. I'd love it if people, care. Like people like, oh, hey, that's Doc. I can depend on him to create cool things. That makes me happy,
Hmm.
like emotionally. But being able to make something that helped people, because that is my goal, is to help people, that was so good. But also, and more importantly, you know, that's what art do. That's what art's for. That's why any human makes art. Like we see things in our head, or we feel things, or we hear things, or we have things we need to deal with on our own, and we make things, we express, you know we sit there and we go, this is a feeling that I have and I want to get it out of me. I want other people to see it. And this is why, the art that matters is the art that does that, right? Like the Epic of Gilgamesh, oldest story in the world that we know
Yes.
of. You know, literally, it's a guy going, "My best friend died, and I'm gonna die," and my monitor shut off. Are
I'm
we
still
still?
here. I can still hear
Okay,
you.
okay, cool. I think my monitor just went to sleep. But like we we have a character who's literally, grasping at this idea of his own mortality. He's coming to realize he's going to die, and he's terrified of it. And the Epic of Gilgamesh lets him go through this journey, this massive epic, completely bonkers journey, so that we can go through that journey too, and we can experience this, and we don't have to lose our friend. We don't have to, whatever. But for those of us who did lose our friends, for those of us who are contemplating our mortality after our friends have died, this can be a salve, right? This can be a means of healing, and that's what I'm hoping for with art. I'm rambling on. I know. I'm sorry, but
No,
like,
you are. So you're fine because when you talked about that, I was actually going to use this to do a brief segue into art. I like to fancy myself a critic. Not necessarily like, oh, your game was good, your game was bad, but
right.
the emotions behind it.
Hmm.
You've talked about on Twitter where um, it was two guys who couldn't talk about the very thing that they had to talk about, and I'm sitting here. I was playing the game, and it was probably my third playthrough.
Hmm.
And I don't know. Are you one of those people who? How do you feel? I'm going to use authorial intent because I don't know if developer intent is a thing. Do you acknowledge developer intent, or are you someone who goes, no? If you got something completely else out of the game, um, like the guy who created Fez, who like kind of had like a breakdown when people didn't understand what he meant with the game.
So
Philfish.
yeah, 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 yeah. Of course, I know who you're talking about. But my approach is trying to think of how to explain this. I don't feel. Hmm. Okay, here's how I can put it.
Hmm.
Art is communication.
Yes.
Okay, like fundamentally, like Marshall McLuhan, like communication. I am saying something, and I put a lot of work into saying something. But because art is communication, we know that, like in McLuhan's theory, right? There's sending and there's receiving,
Hmm.
right? And there can be feedback. I when you're communicating something to a person, you are trying to make sure they get what you're saying. So if you're making a message that doesn't make any sense, then you probably failed as the communicator. Now that's
Hmm.
not to say that you you did, because there are people who are reading what they want to see into a work. This is the problem that we have with the political games discourse that happens all the time.
Hmm.
Like we have people who get out there and they go, is your game political? And a bunch of game writers are sitting there going, well, I'm not writing political fiction. Like, I'm not writing Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. No, my game's not political. And then you have the game critics who, there are many good ones out there. Okay, this is not criticism of the field, but
Yeah.
there are a number of game critics who, when they are fishing for is your game political, are looking for does your game have a point of view? And it would probably just be better to ask that instead of is your game political, because political fiction is a specific thing.
Very, yeah,
Um,
very true.
but it's also, they're asking, does your game make comment on something? Does your game have an argument it's making? And that's because in a lot of like our writing 101 classes and things like that, we're taught, oh yeah, see the yellow wallpaper or the lottery, these stories are actually about blah 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 blah. And like, that's, we're taught that you can decode stories. And
Yes.
then in our critical media courses, right, Lost did, as much as Lost is a great show and I love it, Lost did irreparable damage to, like, or the fandom for Lost did, because, ooh, why are those trees rustling, or ooh, what does this mean? Is it all metaphor for, like, when you do that, you create a bunch of people who think everything has to be about something, like specifically it has a message. But then you go read like Ursula Le Guin, or you read Tarkovsky, David Lynch, like all these actually really good artists that a lot of these people claim to respect, and they're like, nah, bro.
The curtains can just be blue.
Yeah, like Le Guin wrote a really good one, especially because she's like, people keep asking me what the message of my story is, and she's like, if I was here to write a sermon, I would have just written a sermon. I'm not trying to do that. The story is the message, and that's what David Lynch said too. He's like, he's getting interviewed by this guy named Sammy, and I remember because his voice, he just says Sammy, and it's in his very nasally, distinct, lovable voice. He's like, Sammy, Sammy, you gotta understand, like the story is the telling. And I can't do his voice at all. But like, his point is like, you aren't decoding a secret message in here, right? I
Hmm.
don't like I would tell you the Adios is not political. And you may say, well, hold on now there's a character who, clearly expresses opposition to the Vietnam War. And I'd be like, yeah, you're right. But it's not a game about the Vietnam War.
That's a
You know,
time period. Like
yeah,
people actually, oppose the Vietnam War.
yeah. And when I contrast that one character evaded the Vietnam War and another character went, you could argue that there is a political message there, but that's not the game, right? That's a angle through the game,
Yes.
right? So other people may read that and get something out of it because like I'm not making an ink blot, okay? As an artist, I am not making a Rorschach test for you. I did not just make something so that anyone could impose their own meaning onto my work. However, once you release something to the public is going to do what it wants with it. And sometimes, you get something like what's that song called? There's a really good song and it got sampled by Dr. Dre on 2001,
Hmm.
and it's that, song that people play now in like video game montages of cool kills. The next episode, right?
Yeah.
But before that, it was some like British band that, and he samples it, or Kanye West samples the Turtles for one of his songs on. I want to say it's Yeezus, but it
I
might.
think it was Yeezus. It wasn't
Yeah,
Graduation because Graduation was like super Daft Punk, so it was Yeezus.
it's either it might actually be Dark Twisted Fantasy. It's they do the Turtles You Showed Me. That's the sample that he uses.
Ah, yes. Okay.
Um, he when he was producing a track for is it Talib Kweli? I think he's there's a song I think Get By, and he samples Nina Simone Sinnerman, right? When you do that, art goes through a transformative process. Think about when somebody's like, well, this is my song, like this is my girlfriend's song.
Hmm.
They have a specific meaning that song has to them that is not in the song at all. It's context, right? They heard that song when they were, say, on a date somewhere, and that became their song. You
Yes.
know, that is valid. Like when you make something, other people are going to derive meaning from it that may not be what you intended at all. That's okay. That's good. The only place that I personally like get annoyed by is when somebody is like trying to say that I'm saying something else. Then I'm like, I don't like this. You know. Now that said, I have analyzed work where I've said, well, so the work right here, right now, like it is saying this, whether it wants to or not. And I did this with, say, The Last of Us. I said, look, the problem I have with The Last of Us is it is purporting to say something meaningful about human existence, but it is deriving all of its drama from existing zombie fiction. Not only is it saying nothing new, but it is specifically using twists from other works
Hmm.
as its core theme. So The Last of Us ends up being a game that says, man, humans are really fucking miserable, awful people, and violence begets violence, and blah blah blah. It's like, but if we actually look at human beings in the face of disaster, what we often find is that people are actually really supportive and kind. The
Yes.
twists that happened in older zombie fiction happened because they were shocking, because you weren't expecting it. It was meant to surprise you because people aren't like this. Now we're at a point where the twists are all anybody remembers, and now the assumption is, oh, COVID's gonna happen, and suddenly we all need to start, um, buying guns so we can, fight people who are trying to take our gold. And it's like, man, prepper guy, that's not what happens. You need toilet paper and seeds, and you're probably going to want to have, supplies to help other people too, because you probably can't grow enough food on your own, but
Hmm.
together you might be able to get a garden going. It's when we look at human nature in the face of disaster, we see something else. So there are times when you want to say, hey, the work is saying something that's not good, even if the author didn't intend that. That's going to happen. There's nothing you can, like, sometimes you were saying things you didn't know you were saying, or you didn't mean to say.
Hmm.
And it could be as simple as, like, using a phrase you didn't know was not kosher, right? Like, I read the other day, like, call a spade is bad, and I was like, what?
Is it?
Yeah, apparently it is.
Oh, okay.
It's because, even though for it's really been around for like millennia, because like ancient Greek philosophers used it.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it originally meant, this shovel is just a shovel. You know, that's what it used to mean. However, in the 1920s onwards, it started being used as sort of a racial epithet. Like, spade started being it was a word that people started to use to refer to, African Americans.
Oh.
And as a result, when somebody says "let's call a spade," it's like, ooh, there's some baggage there. And I didn't know that at first, right? So
Yeah.
if I go write a story and I include that line in my story, and somebody's like, "Now hold on, you just dog whistle or something," I would be shocked, and I would be really like, "Oh my god, I had no idea." Not now, because now I know that, but like I learned this like 2 days ago. So, you know,
I'm
it,
learning
it
it right now, so you're well ahead of me.
and so the point is, like, you could say and do things within your own context, of the life you've lived, the experiences you've had, that mean whatever they mean to you,
Hmm.
and to somebody else they could mean something completely different. It is
Yes.
completely inescapable, because every single human being is distinct. Every single human being is unique. Every single human being is just as interesting as you.
Hmm.
And that's a huge thing to learn, but it's what helps me be a good writer, is because now I'm like, well, all of my characters have the capacity to be interesting, not just the protagonist. Um, and where am I trying to go with go with this? I'm not quite sure, but like the point is, to kind of answer your question, like, about where I stand on, you know, is the author dead? I would say that good criticism endeavors to understand what the author is saying and decide whether or not what the author is saying is meaningful, or whether they achieved that goal. But the author cannot say, no, you're not allowed to do that with my work. I mean, unless, it's like Nazis who really, really liked Lord of the Rings, then maybe it's okay to be like, hey, Nazis, fuck off. But, because it does suck to have people claiming your work, right? Like, I
Yeah.
remember, there were some game devs who, PewDiePie, who, you know, said a very bad word on a stream after that event. Uh, the I think he'd been streaming this team's game, and they were like, you know what, PewDiePie, you know, you basically live at our behest, right? Like, all this game streaming that happens is technically not allowed unless there was a agreement, like, explicit with the devs. But the devs, they understand there's a symbiotic relationship here. There is some benefit to letting people stream, but
Hmm.
technically, everyone who is streaming a game is really at, they exist at the whim of the developer.
Hmm.
And every developer actually does have the right to say, no, I don't want you streaming my game, because that's my content. You're just sharing my content.
Yes.
And if they decide it's bad for them, then they are well within their rights, as they should be, to say, hey, I don't want you using my work. So, there have been situations like with the PewDiePie case where the developers came out and were like, yeah, we're gonna DMCA claim, which is what the DMCA is for. It's not an abuse of it. We're gonna DMCA claim everything he does with our game. So just don't play with our game. Don't stream our game. We don't want to be associated with you. And they're in their right to do that, honestly. Um, so it's complicated.
Hmm.
That's honestly the easiest way to say it. Like, it is complicated. I find, don't be precious, right? Like, I let's say Adios gets adapted as a TV show, right?
Yep.
I would love to write that TV show. Every episode, I would love to have the casting decisions. I know who I'd want to, run the show. Like, I know all this.
Hmm.
But knowing what Hollywood is and what Hollywood does, and knowing who I am and what I do, I am completely content to just walk away, once I sell, the adaptation rights. Like, I could do either.
Hmm.
I would be happiest if I get to have a say in the TV show because I thought through the game like a TV show as I was working on it. Like I think camera angles and shit. On this new game I'm working on, which is not Adios 2, I actually laid out in a board an entire sequence. Like just boarded out the whole sequence. It's like this is the way I see it. I'm terrible at drawing, so my boards look like garbage, but I want to work with a professional board artist, for that stuff. But like, yeah, I know all these shots. I could make this a cartoon, no problem, or a TV show or a movie. I know how to do all that. But I also know that if somebody, wants to give me $250,000 or $1 million or whatever to option my work, I'll just be like, yeah, have fun, peace, and they can do what they want. And if they make a bad adaptation, as long as it doesn't reflect poorly on me, I'm fine with it.
Hmm.
Nobody hates Avatar because of the M Night Shyamalan movie.
Oh yeah,
Um,
100%.
so that's what it comes down to, right? Is just I made a thing. I did the best I could. I tried to communicate as well as I could what I did. I will be annoyed by people who seem to like intentionally misread what I'm doing or impose their own, like shitty reads onto my work. Like if there's somebody who has like a thesis that all games about the mob are anti-Italian discrimination or some shit, they
Oh
might be
god.
like, yeah,
No.
this is a hypothetical person. This is not an
Yeah.
actual person, right? But if somebody does that, like, oh, if it's about the mob, it's about it's secretly anti-Italian. You know, my game doesn't even have an Italian mob in it. Like I have, Hitman. He's not coded as Italian. He's just in a organized crime thing.
And Saul definitely, yeah, it was because when I was playing through the game, and one of the reads I took of it was kind of taking Farmer out of being the main character, and I said Hitman was the main character, and this was him talking someone out of like assisted suicide because he says we can't do this. You don't want us to sever ties,
Hmm.
and then he says go to a city, start up. There is a world out there for you. There is, and to me, I was like, no, this is him saying like you still have a great life to live. Like
Yep.
you've
Says
had this past life.
give the tree another 10 years of your time, right?
Yeah,
Um,
and do this and be helpful. And it was when I was reading that, I was like, oh, okay, like you could. I was like, this is a scene that if you were to have put him like in hospice and had a guy in a white coat standing next to him, I was like, this is the exact same feeling that I was getting of like if you're suffering with mental health issues and like depression's hitting you,
mhm.
somebody trying to help and reaching out and offering everything they possibly can to do that.
So what's really interesting though is I've heard the suicide thing mentioned several
Mm-hmm.
times, and I gotta be honest, Hitman is trying to talk Farmer out of dying,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not why Farmer is doing this. Farmer is doing this because he believes it's right and he will
Yes.
do it no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I wish I'd been able to do better to communicate more clearly is for the first half of that game until you get to the tree, Farmer thinks he's going to make it out alive.
Huh.
He does not accept that he's going to die until the tree. And that's why he starts to get really flustered, right? And he starts to break. And that's when he says, "Let me like bury me here." That's when he gets it. That's when he accepts it. All before then, like notice how a lot of those scenes in that back and forth, at one point he even says to Hitman, maybe you could come out and live here, you know? Ever think about that? That's not
Yeah.
just a random thing he's saying. He's actually saying, "Why don't you quit your job, buddy? You know, why should I bend my life around what you want? This is what I want." and I want to do the right thing. And for him, that's what it is. It's not an act of suicide. And I think one thing that would have helped is originally we were going to have a journal in the game, and you
Hmm.
see it at the start of the game, right? It's the way you can check your objectives. But originally it was going to have like his past in it, like you could go back a few weeks. And I just, the more I thought about it, the less I liked the idea. It felt too exposition-y for the game. But one thing it would have done is showed you that he went to an oncologist's office not too long ago. And I think maybe if people saw that, they would have understood this isn't suicide. He knows he's going to die. He's just trying to do the right thing. And now you can, because for me, the interesting discussion is his morality. Is he a good person for doing the right thing, or is he just trying to buy his way into heaven? That's, for me, that's what the actual question is. But a lot of people have gone, well, this seems like suicide because he could choose not to and he could live,
Hmm.
but he's choosing this, and that means he's choosing to die. So isn't it suicide? And it's like, well, no. For me, this is sacrificial.
Yes.
His actions are a functionally sacrificial choice. It is, I will give up my life so that other people, like the mob, has a harder time killing people. That is what he
Yes.
thinks he's doing. That is what he's trying to do. Is put his foot down and say, I have enabled evil too much and I need to stop. For me, that's the core of it, right? But a lot of people, like you, have had this interpretation of like it's suicide. And the only reason I want to push back on that a little bit is just because I've dealt with suicide.
Yeah.
Um, not only in my own like mental health stuff. I mean, like, I've literally seen the fallout of suicide. I've carried the casket down the aisle and put people in the ground that I didn't want to put in the ground. And I would not write about suicide in this way. I can't tell you how I would write about it because I haven't fully gotten there yet, and I don't know if I ever would.
Hmm. Yeah, that's.
But for me, there's a mental friction, like just a pushback of like, hold on, this isn't how I think about suicide. So this isn't how I would write about suicide. So for me, there's a bit of gentle pushback there, but it's definitely not like oh, these, nobody gets it, nobody understands me, like I'm a brilliant artist, no one respects, it's not that. I can't do that. Like, no, people have the interpretation they have based on the context they have based on the lives that they've lived.
Mhm.
And I can't take that away from anybody. It would be such a waste. Long time ago, this girl at this church that I went to when I was a little kid, um, she gave my sister and I some jelly beans in like a little bag, and it had a Bible verse attached. We read the Bible verse and you know threw it away because it seemed like it was just a card, and that's what you do with cards. And
Mhm.
you know, ate the jelly beans. We thanked her for the jelly beans. The next week, she went ballistic. And I was like, it's like 8-year-old me is like, what? What did I do? And she's like, you weren't supposed to eat them. They were supposed to be like symbolic. That's too big a word for our age, but like, you know, something like it's supposed to be symbolic of God's love for you or something. It's like they're
Yeah.
jelly beans. You eat jelly beans. So I never want to be like that, right? I never want to be like, no, you're not enjoying this the way I wanted you to enjoy it. When I play games and I see people mod them, right?
Mhm.
I modded games. To me, it's like, ooh, that's really cool. I expect that people will do things to the work and you can't control it, right? Rule 34 exists. Completely different. I know, completely unexpected, but Rule 34 exists, right?
Yeah,
Like,
100%. And then what is it? Rule 68 or the other one where it's like male to female, female to male, and just
uh,
everything else.
63. That's
63.
63.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Rule 34. If it exists, there's porn. Rule 63. If there's a male version, or there will always be an opposite gender counterpart, I think is the exact text. It's been a while since I read the rules of the internet, but like, you know, people are gonna do that with your work. You can't control it, so don't worry about it. But if I feel misunderstood, yeah, I might, pop in and be like, well, hold on there, that's not what I was saying.
Hmm.
Um, but if somebody plays the game and like puts together a compelling case, like, well, here's how suicide's normally been dealt with in fiction, and this game follows a lot of those same beats. It's very specifically like doing this, then I can be like, well, yeah, I guess it's undeniable that it is you know, repeating elements of a story about suicide, but to me, this isn't how I would handle suicide, right? Like we could talk about it like that, but it's not, ultimately at the end of the day, I have to make peace with the fact that when I release it in the world, it ceased to be mine. And the only thing I can be invested with is, making sure that I am understood. But honestly, the game should be able to speak for itself. And as I become a better artist, I think my work will be a lot more clear without being didactic, because let's not be didactic. That's bad writing. Um, but that's me.
And because when now that you've said that and you've shown a different light on it, like I got the assisted suicide. You're right. When he talks about going to hell and buying his way into heaven, one of the cardinal sins, like if you do Dante, you commit suicide, you go what to the sixth circle of hell, and it's eternally painful. You become a tree, it grows, it gnarls, and having someone else do it, you're right. He's putting his foot down. There are points where he says he's wrong, and that's one of the things that I've always loved about, especially being able to talk to people, and talk to someone now who's created a game so narratively driven, um, that I can now go back and play it and be like, let me look for all the things that you have now told me of, hey, you see this, and he's not at this point, he's not. And then I'm going back to the tree, and at the tree he's like, no, that's not what I meant when I was saying this. And it's like, oh, you're not even talking about the tree anymore. Like you're talking about the tree, but we haven't talked about what we need to talk about this entire time.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're hitting the acceptance stage, and we've gone through most of these stages here. So it's great to have this insight. And I know we're a little over that hour mark, so I wanted to touch on one thing that you tweeted out on Twitter,
Okay.
because I wasn't. Uh, you talked about open world games had a problem where
Ooh,
the big
yes.
the big thing was you went to go do something, and this kind of goes along your lines of like beating a game.
Mm-hmm.
I've started, like when I was younger, I played a lot of Call of Duty, I played a lot of Halo because I wanted to play online competitive, and now a little bit older, like I read a lot more again. I want to play a game with a story. Like I still want to do cool things, don't get me wrong,
Yeah, sure.
but I want to do a story. You said open world games have this point where you go somewhere and do something because it's like, here's your check mark, you completed it, you did that. Was there a game in mind that you had that? Because I was like, maybe it
So
was you were looking at a specific game and I just hadn't seen it.
no, no, no. So yes, but also no, but also yes. Uh, I can tell you that the game that I was playing the day that I said that was Mafia 3.
Okay.
But I have been playing a bunch of open world games. Xenoblade Chronicles X,
Hmm.
Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Watch Dogs 2. I'm just looking at this list I have on my whiteboard next to me. Yakuza 0. Um,
Great game.
yeah, and Mafia 3 and Crackdown 3. And Mafia 3 and Crackdown 3, there's one of the weird things about video games is there are a lot of like genres inside of genres.
Hmm.
So an example of this is the sort of Crackdown 3 slash Mafia 3 model, which is there's a list and it's like you got to kill this guy, and this guy so that you can kill these other guys so that you can kill the big boss. That's
Yes.
the arc of the experience. Whereas you get game like Grand Theft Auto 4 or Red Dead Redemption or Days Gone, and it pops up more episodically, and it goes, okay, you finish this quest, like you finish quest for Jimmy, and then a quest for Bobby shows up, and you go do Bobby, and then Samantha's quest shows up, and you go over and you do her quest, and then another Jimmy quest pops up, and you go through this sort of snaking process of beating different stories,
Hmm.
and that's how they complete it, right? That's how those games work. Then there's the Saints Row model, which is, here's a zone, you capture the zone, you unlock the zone, you can see things within it, and that's a similar model to what um, Assassin's Creed games do. Mad Max did it too, and I really love Mad Max. Like
Hmm.
that game is, I love that game. I love the ending of that game. I love how it's absolutely inevitable. Um, It's a great world. It's eerie. It's surreal. It's spectacular. It is a game that I love, but it's also just a game where you can kind of just sit down and go, tick, tick, tick. I'm ticking off all the things on my checklist.
Hmm.
A lot of these games have checklists. You know, there's the Ubisoft checklist, blah, blah, blah. But the specific model of like, go to this zone and do this number of objectives, and then you've unlocked the zone, and then you unlock the next zone. That particular model is boring because a lot of the objectives you're doing are really repetitive. Like in Crackdown 3, I was playing yesterday. Oh, sorry.
No, you're good.
I was playing Crackdown 3 yesterday, and I had to take out like 4 train stations. You go to the train station, you shoot all the guys, and then the boss spawns, and you shoot the boss, and then you've captured the train station. The end.
Hmm.
Bosses aren't even that different. They all have a shield. You take out the shield, and then you shoot the guy more, and then a shield pops up, and you know, it's boring. It's just a thing you do, and it's so repetitive and unsurprising that it loses its excitement.
Hmm.
If the gameplay can't hold that up, it's got nothing. And that's the problem that I have with that style of open world game. I think the best way to do it is the Grand Theft Auto model. It is the Days Gone model where, you are just jumping from story to story. And, that feels like a Terry Pratchett novel or a TV show where you have multiple characters like 24, right? Um, but they give you a degree of choice. So you may just want to focus on one character.
Hmm.
You only want to focus on, say, Samantha's storyline, right? So you sit down, you play all of her story, but then eventually you hit a point where it's like, well, there aren't any more, but her story clearly isn't done. So then you have to go over to Jimmy and play his.
Hmm.
But the best way to do is just kind of, oh, where am I in the world? What story is closest to me? All right, I'm going to do that one. And then you'll find somehow, interestingly, mysteriously, that you're near a different story bit. So they kind of let you play a little bit out of order, but there's still a bit of order. So you have to complete certain, like hit certain gates before you can unlock more of a story,
Hmm.
and that will take you through it until you get to kind of the climax. And I think that's probably the best approach for open worlds, personally.
Okay.
Adios is
But
technically open world.
no, it is because you. That's one of the things I did when it got to the towards the end of it was I just started wandering
Hmm.
to see how many different places I could go to and what I could see that like maybe you'd put like a one of the big games for me that like my wife and I especially connect over was Horizon Zero Dawn.
Hmm.
Because when I pitched that game to her, I was like, "Hey, robot dinosaurs," and she went, "That is so dumb and so video game and whatever. Like, enjoy your game." And we sat down and we played it. And she called it from the beginning. There's like one point where she's like, "Okay, this is the rest of the story," and I was like, "Okay, that makes sense." But the ability to be like, "Here's a world that feels familiar," and then just explore. Like the beginning, it says, "Hey, you can't leave this area. Do all the stuff here. You know how to play the game. That's all you need to know."
Hmm.
And then you can just wander, and you can go to areas where you're not equipped, and it's you can beat it with the base level gear. Of course, you can always get better because it has a progression to it. And I was wondering if when it comes to emotion, is wonder, do you think, a solid emotion that you could try to like build a game on? Like, just here's the mystery and just get human curiosity. Can that carry a game, or do you find that that can carry a game further?
So for me, I think that you have to have a variety of emotions for any work to function.
Hmm.
And I mean any work to function. And this is a problem that I see a lot in a lot of work is people go for like one tone and
Hmm.
then they want to keep that tone, and you can't do that. Like The Godfather has multiple emotions in it, right? It has anger and sadness. They may be on a similar end of the spectrum, but it has these specific emotional qualities, and it's important that it does for the work to function. It's like having a plate and putting a different kind of like multiple colors on your plate, right? Like I've got some greens on there, those are my peas. I've got some brown on there, that's my, steak. I've got potatoes, they're potato colored, you know. doing that, having a healthy plate,
Hmm.
different colors on your plate, is a better meal for you. And emotionally, it's the same way. So wonder is good, but I said this about horror, and I've said this about comedy, and it's really true for anything that I've done. It's also true for Adios, really, is that everything is about setup and payoff.
Hmm.
So for Wonder, the reason that Fallout 3 has one of the best openings of all time is because you spend so much time underground that when you walk out into the Capital Wasteland for the first time, it is an event. And other games have had those events. An example of this being, say, Resident Evil 8, which I played recently. It has
Hmm.
a bit where you see the village for the first time, but it's a little bit less impressive because you've already been doing much of other things and you're worried more about monsters. Ugh. It doesn't feel like you're actually kind of getting out and doing something spectacular. So for me, Wonder I think is best as punchline and not setup. Similar to the way that Terror is really, really good punchline, but it's not very good at setup. Horror is really, or sorry, Terror is good setup. Horror is punchline. Actually, I made a YouTube video on this years ago, and some random YouTuber guy found it, and he got really mad at me, and he was like, "Ah, this is terrible. Who even said it? Who are you? Who made you God? Why are you setting these definitions?" And it's like, man, Stephen King talks about this in On Writing. I'm pretty sure.
Hmm.
You know, um, it's literally like accepted horror theory. Like, this is what it is. This is how academia discusses it. There's terror, which is the fear of what might be, and
Hmm.
there's horror, which is when you see it. Terror is the moments leading up to discovering the alien in the vents in Alien, the movie.
Yeah, it's like
Horror
it's the
is when you
Jaws.
see the alien reach out at Dallas. That's the horror. And
Hmm.
it doesn't work without that setup, that slow dread. And so many bad horror writers, like in games, right? The people will be like, "Oh, I don't really like jump scares. I really like, the slow creeping dread." And then they go make a game where nothing happens, and you're like, "Eh, okay, sure, whatever, dude." No one remembers those games. You know what they do remember? Silent Hill 2, where Pyramid Head shows up and chases you. And yeah, that's not a jump scare because jump scares are often just to startle you,
Hmm.
but that's horror. Like, they have
Yes.
terror, but terror is not what you're experiencing when Pyramid Head is dragging his axe, or his Buster Sword or whatever after you. That that is horror. You can't get that without terror. You need terror to build up to that. And so I think Wonder's the same way. I think I there's a Ace Combat type game I want to make, and I
Hmm.
want to have a sequence in there where you are flying through the clouds with rain on your windshield and you can't really see anything, and then you just break out into a dogfight, like just come through the clouds, and because where we live as terrestrial entities, on Earth, uh, clouds are above us, but in the sky you could fly through a cloud and suddenly be in perfect clear weather. That's
Yes.
just sitting there above the cloud. And that's what I want, is just come out of the clouds and be like, boom, oh my god, there's fighter jets everywhere spiraling around. Just bring the radio in right at that moment to have people just yelling, like sensory overload. That's how I wanted to create a sense of awe, is just to create to give you the sense of the bigness of the sky. That's how I want to do it, right?
Hmm.
Um and so yeah, Wonder, I don't know, I don't think it can carry a game, but I think it can be the punchline, right? Just the way that a punchline doesn't carry a joke.
You have to have this, and I remember you talking about on the podcast was you have to have this setup, and it was. And when you say that, because I'm going through the game, I'm like, okay, losing the father figure, it's very hero's journey. I don't want to do this. This isn't for me. And then you kind of, here's the sword. Here's your inheritance. Go forth, prosper, and it's the hero's journey and trying to figure out your place. Like, who am I as a human and a place in this world that carries it? And I just going back now and replaying it because I know the story just to see. I love the world building around it because to me that is the ultimate setup is this great world that I get to exist in. But I do have you like well over the hour mark, so I do want to thank you
Just
so
quick
much.
question, quick
Yeah,
question. Which thing is the hero's journey?
Horizon Zero Dawn.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's probably one of its weakest elements, to be honest. Uh,
really.
yeah, there's a reason why a games writer I know has a sign in the writing room for their studio, which is X days since someone has mentioned the hero's journey.
Hmm.
Like, it's because a lot of working writers fucking hate the hero's journey because it's used by people who do not understand how stories work
Mm-hmm.
to be like, here's the formula for good story. You got to do it like this. And I read a really good I read a really good takedown of the hero's journey where they were like, look, Star Wars, people say, oh, Star Wars is proof the hero's journey works, but here's another hero's journey that's in Star Wars, and they walk through a lot of the stuff that actually got cut, like going to Tosh Station or whatever, or
Mm-hmm.
seeing a dogfight in the sky, or whatever, and they actually constructed a very boring movie based on the hero's journey within Star Wars in Luke's own journey, and they're like, the hero's journey doesn't like it was a way of Joseph Campbell saying, look at how some stories have commonalities in them.
Mm-hmm.
It was not meant, and he would say this too. I literally have a Hero's Journey book on my shelf by Campbell.
Is it Hero of a Thousand Faces?
No, it's I can't read it from here.
That's fine.
Yeah, it's The Power of Myth, I think, by
Oh,
Joseph
okay.
Campbell.
Yeah, I know what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah, yeah. A teacher gave it to me, and that's why I keep it, is because it was given to me by a very good teacher.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, a lot of people resent it because it's where you get like the exec coming in and going, okay, but where's the fucking rejection on page 14 or where I don't we don't need that. Like,
Yeah.
don't you don't want to build a story that way. You want to build a story on character.
Yes.
Character says, I want this, but something's in the way and I need to overcome it to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
All Joseph Campbell was doing was identifying, oh, here's some different myths that have the same thing, but there's a bajillion other myths that don't follow the hero's journey at all. So it's one of those things like, ooh, do not talk to too many game writers favorably about the hero's journey, because a lot of them get really annoyed with it, and rightfully so. It's just better as like a thing for myth studies
Mm-hmm.
than it is for narrative. For me, the most powerful and important piece of writing I've ever read, I think this is a good way to close too, is David Mamet, one of the greatest playwrights of the 20th century, writing his letter to the writers of the unit, which was a TV show that he was working on at the time. And it is a brilliant little, like, all caps, sardonic explanation of what a story needs to be dramatic. And he has this bit, and he says, to the suits and to us, sometimes it seems like our job is to convey information. But you wouldn't tune in to view information. I wouldn't tune in to view information. The suits won't tune in for information. We come for drama. And then the rest of his thing is about what drama is and why it matters, which is, it's like, who who is it, what do they want, and why now, basically. um and there's all sorts of little nuggets of writing advice that you can pop in, like, um right, begin any scene as late as possible
Mm-hmm.
and exit it as early as possible. Things like that really help things feel better. There's tons of great writing advice out there. Just I personally try to avoid McKee and Campbell myself. Um, Also, Campbell was super racist, so there's that. But
I see. For me, it was I went to school and I had a great teacher who loved Oscar Wilde, and I fell in love with Wilde's criticism, where he would say that my job is like, or anyone's job who does like a let's play and does like a criticism of a
mhm,
game, like I now have to take my opinion on your game and make it enjoyable. Um,
mhm,
and I loved the sarcasm of like how posh criticism actually was and was seen. So it's like I said the hero's journey because it, it's like you said maybe you were joking about this on Twitter where it was you said you like anime with good stories, but you also like when it goes, "I'm sorry, master, I have to use that technique," and it's that kind of like guilty pleasure. Like at the end of the day, you're right. The hero's journey, it's very cliche. It has this, and you don't need it, but
Hmm.
sometimes you just want to like be like, okay, I remember that. That's familiar, and I do like hearing it.
Yep, yep. That's absolutely valid. Yeah, I don't know, there's a really good pleasure in just knowing a character is about to go all out, you
Hmm.
know?
Oh yeah,
And it's in part because of what I am writing right now. It requires some of this, but that's a secret. Still
I
working on that game.
I completely understand. If I can throw any event in there, a lot of people hate on the first season of Hunter x Hunter, uh, but there's a point where the main character goes up against someone so much stronger than him, and it's probably one of my favorite because at the very end of it, he just goes, the guy beats him, and he goes, but you had to use your other hand, and you said you wouldn't, and it's that little win of like growth and
Hmm.
just him learning. And if you haven't seen that, I highly recommend it.
I do need to see Hunter x Hunter at some point. I will say that the way I am constructing this new story
Mhm.
is to surprise people who think they know what's going to happen.
Oh,
It
okay.
is it is a story that is built on people going, there's no way Doc is going to do that. There's no way, secretly psyching themselves up for this, getting really excited. And then they get there and they go, oh my God, this was way better than I thought. He's doing something completely different that I wasn't expecting. And he seeded this like 12 chapters ago. Holy fuck. That's what I'm going for, you know? Because that's what I want, right? It's not
Mhm.
about them seeing me and being impressed with me. It's about getting them to the emotional, oh my God, it's I want the audience to feel powerfully. I want them to feel incredible emotionality when they hit the work. So the things I'm trying to do with this work are go really deep into kind of the things that Ace Combat does with the emotional intensity.
Mhm.
So, but to do that, I'm trying to be really deft with anime tropes and storytelling. And not just like, ooh, I'm going to subvert your tropes. I mean, like, really strong character driven stuff that plays with things you're familiar with and then surprises you with, like, oh, right, that makes sense. I didn't think it could go there. Like, that kind of thing, where it's like, I want you to try to anticipate what I'm doing, but I want you to be wrong, but I want you to be really happy that you're wrong. If that makes sense?
That no, I that makes complete sense. And so you don't give away more on your work, and we can wrap this up. I have
Yeah,
one
yeah.
final question for you,
Sure. Sure.
before we roll out red carpet for you and show where you're at. Are you the kind of person who will pick up a book, a story, like a point A, point B,
Hmm.
and read the last page first at all?
No, I tend to find myself wanting to do that more with like movies,
Mm-hmm.
but with books, no, I sit down and I just read the book. I have
Okay.
occasionally, peeked later on, but generally I try to start at the beginning and work my way through because the writer is building something,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a journey, and it's best I think to start at the beginning, unless you read like Joe Abercrombie. That journey wasn't worth it. But anything else, it's yeah, yeah. Generally, I try to respect the art.
Mm-hmm.
But there are times when like I'm watching a movie and I'm really curious, like who is this guy? I have to know, and then I pull up the Wikipedia summary. But I'm trying to avoid doing that because sure there was that one study that one time that said actually spoilers don't ruin your enjoyment that assholes love to bring up
Mm-hmm.
to to be like, so I should be able to spoil for you, but the truth is it's just better to just go linear. Start at the beginning, work your way to the end, have a good time. And this is one of the reasons why I stopped reading reviews. I just decided, you know what? I don't need to check out um, reviews uh, until I finished the work myself, and then I will read the reviews to see what other people are saying. Um, so that's been fun. Is setting that rule for myself because now I don't feel quite as swayed by people
Mm-hmm.
or make my own observations and I get to compare and contrast myself with other people and I find that more fun. So Yeah, I try to just take the work exactly as it was intended because that tends to lead me to discovery or excitement. Um, so one thing we've been doing on these Final Fantasy or Kingdom Hearts streams I've been doing is no spoilers. Like I have questions and I ask those, and my guides on this journey are often very adamant. Like, nope, you cannot know that yet. We do not want you to know that yet. And then Oron from Final Fantasy X shows up, and I'm like, oh my god, it's him! This is the greatest thing. And the joy I get from discovering him when the game makes it hype is way better. Because yeah, I was talking with some friends about Yakuza 7 the other
Hmm.
day, and we were talking about what makes it powerful. And I said, well, one of the things is other character reactions. Like, I didn't even know who this character was because Yakuza 7 is my first full Yakuza game. Like, I actually sat down and played the whole thing all the way through.
Hmm.
I didn't even know who this character was, but him showing up caused other characters to like gasp. And it's just like when little children like see an adult, um, like little children will do something and they'll think it's fine, like try to eat a candle, and then an adult will like stop and panic and pull them away, and then the kid will act scared because they realize the adult's scared, and so they're learning from the adult. Oh, I need to be scared here.
Hmm.
Um, it's the same. Like humans still do that even when we're adults. We feel emotions based on what the people around us are feeling. So when you create a scene and you have like all the characters go, "Oh my god, it's that legendary guy!" Everyone, like the audience, is gonna feel that way more strongly than if you just show a shot of the guy looking cool. So
Yeah, I
I
like it.
like coming into story in the direction they wanted me to, because that's how you create those feelings. So I can miss them if I come in way later.
No,
Hope that makes sense.
no, that makes sense. It actually takes you back to the beginning when you were talking about Barbara Walters interviews and the cuts from games where it's waiting for that reaction. But thank you so much for joining me and your insight into the world of creating the language that's used, and then talking about that uh, assembly of a game, ideas and tropes. Where can we find you?
You can find me at Doc Squiddy on Twitter. You can also find me at docseuss.medium.com, which is my place where I write often very long and in-depth threads about games. So, um, like I spent, God, I don't even know, uh, 13,000 words on Death Stranding, I think, just talking about why I thought it was a really good game. And I'm not even like a big Kojima stan. I just played that game and it hit me really hard, and I wanted everybody to know. So yeah, docseuss.medium.com for my medium posts. Uh, at DocSquiddy for uh, Twitter, and then twitch.tv/DocSeuss. Every once in a while, I stream games, and because I know a lot about games, but I missed a lot of games growing up
Hmm.
because it's super religious conservative parents. Uh, I get to come at games with a fresh eyes, even though I know a lot about games. I'm a professional game designer. I've worked on tons of AAA games. Like I know how to make games good. Some games I miss, like Metroid Prime, which is the game I'm going to be streaming after I finish the Kingdom Hearts series wrap up. So, you know, that's Doxus on Twitch is a good place to watch me be really surprised about certain video games.
I I completely like the whole reason for my channel was my best friend, my wife, and I like coming together with games. I didn't get into much later as well, so
Mhm.
I understand missing a lot of games, or like I came in at like the hype of Call of Duty, like when I was joining the army. So I do understand. But thank you so much for your time. And winners, if you enjoyed this, please follow Doc. I will make sure a link to his Patreon. I'll probably have a link in here to Adios. I highly recommend it. Even though we talked about it and you now know the ending, the journey is well worth it to play that and experience it. So I wholeheartedly recommend it either on Xbox or Steam. Thank you again so much, Doc, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yep. And remember, you're all winners out there. Keep it weird and have a fantastic rest of your day.